which apparently broke apart and sunk last night on Lake Superior. The ship and its 29-man crew vanished in a storm with 80-mile-an-hour winds and wave heights up to 25 feet.
A recent high-resolution scan has finally explored the ship's bridge, an area considered too dangerous during earlier expeditions. Forget the damaged hatch covers. Forget the shoals. What researchers discovered inside the control room is something so unusual that scientists still cannot explain it.
The SS Edmund Fitzgerald, which sank nearly 50 years ago, has been revisited by AI-powered deepwater drones. They've captured images experts say reveal details that were never made public until now.
The Titan's flawless record. The launch ceremony began badly. The woman chosen to christen the vessel needed 3 attempts before the champagne bottle finally shattered against the hull. When the ship eventually slid sideways into the water, it sent a huge wave crashing over the spectators, drenching the crowd. According to reports, one person watching the troubled launch suffered a heart attack and died at the scene. It was hardly the beginning anyone had hoped for. Constructed at Great Lakes Engineering Works and owned by Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance, the vessel represented far more than steel plates and rivets. She stood as a symbol of American industrial strength. And here's something many people don't realize. She was far more than a cargo ship. The Fitzgerald offered luxury accommodations rarely seen aboard a Great Lakes freighter. Crew members had air-conditioned living quarters, tiled bathrooms, and an upscale galley staffed by 2 full-time cooks. A separate guest area, complete with its own lounge and pantry, allowed company executives to travel aboard in comfort. She was also the first Great Lakes freighter built with a fully welded hull, a design intended to increase strength and durability. From the day she entered service, the Fitzgerald attracted attention. Her elegant lines, white superstructure, and burgundy-colored hull made her instantly recognizable on the often gray waters of the Great Lakes. People gathered in ports simply to watch her sail by. Families crowded onto bridges to see her pass beneath, listening as her deep horn echoed across the water like the voice of a giant. Newspapers referred to her as the Queen of the Great Lakes. Sailors called her the pride of the American side. Yet what truly made the Fitzgerald famous was not only her appearance or size, it was her performance. She earned a reputation for speed and regularly shattered cargo records. Capable of carrying more than 26,000 tons of taconite iron ore pellets from Duluth, Minnesota, to steel mills in Detroit and Toledo, she repeatedly set new standards. During her career, she broke her own record for the largest single cargo shipment 6 different times. Her efficiency also created a loyal crew. Many sailors remained aboard for years, something uncommon in the maritime industry. They trusted the ship, respected her capabilities, and believed she was safe. To many of them, she seemed impossible to sink. Her final captain, Ernest McSorley, reflected that same confidence. A seasoned mariner approaching retirement after 44 years at sea, McSorley had earned a reputation for steady leadership and excellent seamanship. He was not known as a gambler. He was exactly the type of captain sailors wanted during bad weather. Over the course of his career, he had faced storms, ice, and dense fog, while earning the respect of fellow captains throughout the Great Lakes. Remarkably, this voyage was expected to be his final trip before retirement at season's end. He commanded the Fitzgerald, a ship he deeply admired and considered among the strongest vessels afloat. His crew shared that belief. In nearly 20 years of service, the ship had never suffered a fatal accident, experienced a catastrophic breakdown, or failed to deliver cargo. Still, life aboard the Fitzgerald came with challenges. The Great Lakes, often mistaken for peaceful inland waters, could become dangerous with little warning. Storms developed rapidly. Waves reached ocean-like heights. Ice blocked shipping lanes, and thick fog could reduce visibility to almost zero. Yet despite these dangers, the Fitzgerald had successfully completed more than 700 voyages. Every safe return strengthened the belief that she was nearly indestructible. As a result, the ship became deeply woven into the culture of Great Lakes communities. Visitors photographed her as she traveled through the Soo locks. Children in port towns could identify her instantly from her silhouette alone. Years later, Canadian singer Gordon Lightfoot would immortalize the ship in song, turning her into a legend. But before tragedy struck, the Fitzgerald was much more than a legend. She was a living presence on the lakes, moving through storms and sunsets, admired by thousands and cherished by the sailors who worked aboard her. By the autumn of 1975, she remained one of the most respected freighters operating on the Great Lakes. Years of hard work had left scars on her hull, yet her reputation remained spotless. She was dependable. She was trusted. And for the men boarding her in early November for another run toward Detroit, she felt like home. Neither the crew, Captain McSorley, nor the families waving goodbye from shore had any reason to think they were seeing her for the last time. Yet on November 10, 1975, as one of Lake Superior's fiercest storms swept across the water, the Fitzgerald's story changed forever. Within hours, she would disappear without a sound. Beneath all her strength and prestige lay a weakness no one recognized until it was too late.
If you think you can safely go back into the area, I would request that you do so. 8 feet up in the water too, so I don't know whether I can do it or not. I'll give it a try, but that's all I can do.
Swallowed by the lake, on November 9, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald left Superior, Wisconsin, carrying more than 26,100 tons of taconite pellets, destined for a steel mill in Detroit. It was a familiar route, one the ship had traveled hundreds of times before, but conditions on the Great Lakes were changing. Winter was arriving, and weather forecasts warned of deteriorating conditions. Even so, no one predicted the monstrous storm forming over Lake Superior. This was no ordinary storm. Great Lakes sailors call such systems a November witch, a dangerous weather event that develops when two powerful systems collide over the relatively warm waters of the lakes. One system arrives from Canada carrying cold, dry air, while another pushes north from the Gulf of Mexico carrying warm, moist air. Together, they create an explosive weather system. Atmospheric pressure plummets, and winds intensify dramatically. By November 10th, the storm had developed into one of the most severe ever recorded on the Great Lakes. Winds exceeded 70 miles per hour, reaching hurricane strength. Waves climbed beyond 25 feet and hammered the Fitzgerald's hull relentlessly. Captains navigating the lake that evening reported seeing rogue waves far larger than that, some reaching 35 feet. Sailors referred to these waves as the Three Sisters, a sequence of 3 giant waves arriving so quickly that a ship has little chance to recover between impacts. The first wave floods the deck. The second piles on even more water and weight. The third can force the bow beneath the surface for good. Snow and ice swept across the deck as visibility dropped to nearly zero. Yet despite the terrible weather, the Fitzgerald continued pressing ahead. Captain Ernest McSorley remained in frequent radio contact with the nearby freighter SS Arthur M. Anderson, which sailed roughly 10 to 15 miles behind. The Anderson was smaller and older, but her captain, Bernie Cooper, possessed experience equal to McSorley's. Throughout the storm, both captains monitored each other's positions using radar. At one point, Captain Cooper watched on radar as the Fitzgerald was struck by 2 of the massive Three Sisters waves, disappearing beneath water before re-emerging. As the afternoon progressed, McSorley began reporting serious problems. This marked a turning point in the story. Around 3:30 p.m., his voice came over the radio. "Anderson, this is the Fitzgerald. I have a fence rail down, 2 vents lost or damaged, and a list." For sailors, the word list is deeply troubling. It means a ship is leaning and may be taking on water. McSorley also reported that the ship's radar had failed. He was effectively navigating blind and depended on the Anderson to guide him toward Whitefish Bay. Safety lay only about 17 miles away. It was painfully close. But Lake Superior offered no mercy that night. The wind grew stronger. The waves became even larger, crashing against the vessel with tremendous force. Ice accumulated across the deck, placing additional strain on an already damaged ship. At 7:10 p.m., Morgan Clark, first mate aboard the Anderson, radioed the Fitzgerald for one final status report. "Fitzgerald, how are you holding up?" The astonishing part is that the response contained no panic. There was no distress call and no request for assistance. McSorley's reply sounded calm, almost routine. "We are holding our own." Only 10 minutes later, the Fitzgerald disappeared from the Anderson's radar screen. One moment, she appeared as a clear target. The next moment, she was gone. There was no SOS, no distress flare, no final plea for help. The 729-foot freighter carrying 29 men vanished almost instantly, swallowed by Lake Superior and the raging storm as though she had never existed. It was an eerie silence. Most sinking ships leave behind desperate radio calls or emergency signals. The Fitzgerald left nothing. For the families of the 29 crew members, that silence became the most painful part of the disaster. There were no final messages and no last goodbyes. Captain Cooper aboard the Anderson was the first to realize disaster had struck. He repeatedly attempted to contact McSorley. There was no answer. He notified the Coast Guard, which also attempted to raise the Fitzgerald by radio without success. Although the Anderson had barely reached the relative safety of Whitefish Bay, she turned back into the storm to search for the missing vessel. The Coast Guard immediately launched a large rescue operation. Aircraft, helicopters, and ships searched the storm-lashed waters of Lake Superior. But hopes of finding survivors quickly faded. Search crews discovered only scattered debris, fragments of lifeboats and slicks of oil drifting across the surface. The Fitzgerald had gone down with every man aboard. 4 days later, the Navy used advanced magnetic detection equipment to locate what appeared to be the wreck site. Soon afterward, a submersible confirmed the discovery through photographs. The wreck rested 530 feet beneath the surface, broken into 2 main sections. The bow remained upright and partially buried in lake-bottom sediment. Nearby, the stern lay overturned, twisted, and heavily damaged. The mangled steel revealed the violence of the ship's final moments. Even in death, however, the Fitzgerald refused to give up all of her secrets. How could a vessel considered among the strongest on the Great Lakes disappear so quickly without warning, under the command of an experienced captain and crew? How could 29 men vanish without leaving behind even a clue? At the heart of the Edmund Fitzgerald disaster lies a mystery that has lasted for nearly 50 years. When the giant freighter disappeared beneath the waters of Lake Superior, she left behind far more than wreckage. She left behind unanswered questions. There were no survivors, no distress call, and only small pieces of debris ever recovered. Investigators had little to work with, and the evidence never pointed clearly in one direction. What followed was more than an investigation into a shipwreck. It became a decades-long debate filled with rival theories, conflicting reports, and doubts that still remain today. Theory 1. The faulty hatch covers. The first official investigation was carried out by the United States Coast Guard in 1977. Their findings appeared fairly simple. The Fitzgerald's hatch covers had failed during the storm. These hatch covers were among the ship's most important components. The vessel carried 21 enormous steel hatch covers, and each one was fastened with 68 heavy-duty clamps. In total, more than 1,400 clamps had to be manually secured by the crew. According to the Coast Guard, some of those clamps may not have been properly fastened. As huge 30-foot waves crashed across the deck, the covers could have been ripped open, allowing water to flood the cargo holds. Once the forward holds filled with water, the ship would have lost buoyancy at the bow. Her front end would have dropped lower and lower until she plunged nose first to the lake bottom. But there was a major problem with this explanation. The families of the 29 crew members strongly objected to the report. In many ways, the Coast Guard's findings suggested that crew error played a role in the sinking. Captain McSorley had a reputation as a careful and highly experienced sailor. His crews were known for being professional, disciplined, and dependable. To many, the idea that they had failed to secure something as basic as hatch clamps seemed completely out of character. Family members argued that McSorley would never have allowed such carelessness. Later studies added another complication. During the Fitzgerald's 17 years in service, many of the clamps had been repaired or replaced individually rather than all at once. Some researchers believe those parts may not have met proper standards. If that was the case, the crew may have been unable to create a watertight seal regardless of how carefully they secured them. Theory 2. The 6-fathom shoal. This is perhaps the most widely discussed explanation and the one strongly supported by the Lake Carriers Association. According to this theory, the Fitzgerald did not simply fail in the storm. She had already been badly damaged. Captain Cooper aboard the Anderson had been monitoring the Fitzgerald throughout the storm. He later reported that the vessel had passed dangerously close to 6-fathom shoal, a shallow and hazardous area near Caribou Island. Navigation charts for that region were known to be inaccurate. Supporters of this theory believe the Fitzgerald struck bottom in what sailors call a shoaling event. The impact could have ripped open the hull. This explanation matches remarkably well with Captain McSorley's radio report at 3:30 p.m., in which he mentioned that the ship had developed a list, had lost 2 vents, and was having trouble with its pumps. If this theory is correct, the Fitzgerald had been quietly taking on water for hours. The damage may have sealed her fate long before the final radio transmission, while the storm merely delivered the final blow. Captain Cooper later testified that his radar showed the Fitzgerald appearing to hump up. It looked as though the bow and stern were dipping while the center rose upward, almost as if the ship had passed over a submerged ridge or hidden rock formation. Theory 3. Catastrophic structural failure. The National Transportation Safety Board proposed a different possibility. Investigators suggested that the Fitzgerald may have suffered a catastrophic structural failure while still on the surface, causing the vessel to break apart before it sank. But what could have caused such a failure? In 1969, the Fitzgerald underwent a major modification. Shipyards literally cut the vessel in half and inserted a new midsection measuring 84 feet in length. The goal was to increase cargo capacity. In the years that followed, the ship was also authorized to carry heavier loads than originally planned. As a result, she rode lower in the water. Because lengthening large ships in this way was still relatively new, some engineers worried that the changes had weakened the vessel's overall strength. Questions were raised about whether the ship had developed a hogging problem, where the hull bends or sags through the middle. This theory gained support from reports of the infamous Three Sisters waves. According to this idea, One giant wave lifted the bow, while another raised the stern, leaving the longer middle section unsupported above a deep trough. With thousands of tons of iron ore on board, the forces involved would have been enormous. Under that pressure, the ship could have snapped apart almost instantly. Such a sudden breakup would also explain why no Mayday call was ever made. The crew may not have had enough time to react. Theory 4. The rogue wave. This explanation shares similarities with the structural failure theory, but places the blame on a single massive wave. In this scenario, a rogue wave, possibly exceeding 35 feet in height, swept across the vessel. Mariners refer to this type of sinking as foundering. One enormous wave, or perhaps several in succession, could have forced the bow beneath the surface before the ship had time to recover. With the front end underwater and the engines still pushing from behind, the Fitzgerald may have effectively driven herself underwater like a submarine. As the ship descended, the tremendous pressure and twisting forces could have torn the vessel apart. Like the structural failure theory, this explanation would account for the complete absence of a distress call. Everything would have happened in moments. For many years, these four theories dominated discussions about the disaster. Sailors, historians, investigators, and the families of those lost debated them endlessly. Yet none has ever been proven beyond doubt. But what if the storm wasn't responsible at all? What if the answer lay somewhere else entirely? What if the secret was hidden within the cargo hold itself? Wild theories. The official explanations all sound reasonable. Storm damage, grounding, metal fatigue. Each offers a logical answer. Yet the Fitzgerald's disappearance was so sudden and so complete that it created a vacuum, and over time, far stranger ideas began filling that empty space. Many people don't realize just how unusual some of the theories surrounding the Fitzgerald have become. Wild Theory 1. The UFO Connection. This is where the story moves from unusual to downright bizarre. For decades, a small group of researchers has focused on reports of unidentified aerial phenomena around Lake Superior during the days leading up to November 10th. Several pilots and eyewitnesses in Canada claim to have seen strange lights moving rapidly through the sky. Then there is Captain Cooper's account. According to him, the Fitzgerald did not gradually disappear from radar. One moment, the ship appeared as a large, solid target. The next moment, it was simply gone. Not fading, not breaking apart, just gone. Some have interpreted this as evidence that something extraordinary occurred. An even stranger story comes from Ontario. According to local accounts, a man claimed he had been listening to radio traffic that night and heard a crew member shout, "Don't let them on board!" moments before communications suddenly ended. There is no solid evidence that this actually happened, and most researchers dismiss the story. Still, it has become part of the legend surrounding the disaster. Did the crew witness something unusual? Did they encounter something they were never supposed to see? Some believers think so. Others even suggest the Fitzgerald was taken. Wild Theory 2. The Great Lakes Triangle. Most people know about the Bermuda Triangle, but many Great Lakes sailors insist that North America's true Devil's Triangle lies much closer to home. The waters around Whitefish Point, where the Fitzgerald sank, have long carried the nickname the Graveyard of the Great Lakes. Thousands of ships have been lost there. The area is undeniably dangerous, but some believe there is more at work than storms and rough water. One frequently cited example is the SS Bannockburn. The vessel disappeared without a trace in the same region in 1902. In the years that followed, sailors reported sightings of a ghostly ship surrounded by ice drifting across the lake. Another famous case involves the SS Kamloops, which vanished in 1927. Although the wreck was eventually located, the bodies of crew members, preserved by the freezing water, were discovered in the engine room and inside their cabins, as though they had never realized the ship was sinking. For generations, many sailors have viewed this stretch of Lake Superior as a place where ships do not simply sink, they vanish. Wild theory. 3. Magnetic anomalies. This theory is a little more realistic, and honestly, that's what makes it so frightening. Remember, McSorley reported that his radar was out. It's also possible that his compasses were malfunctioning. Why would that happen? Because of the Canadian Shield. The ancient rock beneath Lake Superior is among the oldest on Earth, and it's packed with iron and other magnetic minerals. For generations, sailors have talked about strange magnetic disturbances in this part of the lake, places where compasses spin in circles and electronic equipment starts acting strangely. What if geology itself doomed the Fitzgerald? What if a powerful magnetic disturbance threw off McSorley's instruments, convincing him that he was safely on course when he was actually heading straight toward 6 Fathom Shoal? In that situation, he would have been sailing blind and completely disoriented, a deadly combination during such a violent storm. 4. The cursed ship. Others believe the Fitzgerald was simply doomed from the very beginning. Think back to the strange events during her launch. The champagne bottle refused to break. A spectator lost his life. And the story only gets stranger. The ship was named after Edmund Fitzgerald, the president of the insurance company that financed her construction. His father had also been a Great Lakes captain, so the family had deep roots on these waters. But here's the really eerie part. Edmund Fitzgerald's son-in-law would later become chairman of another company, the company that owned the SS Carl D. Bradley, another giant lake freighter that snapped in two and disappeared during a storm on Lake Michigan, killing 33 of its 35 crew members. Some people believe those families were somehow cursed by the Great Lakes themselves. These strange theories, from UFOs to family curses, exist because of one frustrating reality. Nobody truly knew what happened. The answers sat 530 feet below the surface in complete darkness. Until now, when a new expedition reached places no one had ever explored before. The tape is recovered. Just before sunrise on a calm day in 2024, a research ship floated above the GPS coordinates of one of the Great Lakes' most famous grave sites. Far below that quiet stretch of Lake Superior rested the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, lying 530 feet beneath the water. The pressure at that depth is enormous, more than 230 pounds per square inch. The water temperature is only slightly above freezing, and the darkness is absolute. Nearly 5 decades had passed since the ship disappeared, yet the mystery still had no final answer. This time, though, investigators came prepared with something new. They weren't depending on old sonar images or divers wearing heavy suits. Instead, they brought an AI-assisted underwater drone, a remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, that could examine the wreck in greater detail than ever before. This machine was nothing like the ROVs of the 1980s. It carried 6 powerful floodlights, 4K cameras, multi-beam sonar systems, and AI-powered navigation software. The drone was built to inspect every rivet, beam, and piece of wreckage with incredible precision. Its thrusters let it move slowly and quietly, without disturbing the sight, while its onboard computers generated live 3D models of everything it encountered. For the first time, researchers could study the Fitzgerald not as a dark shape in murky water, but as a highly accurate digital reconstruction. As the ROV descended into the freezing blackness, its lights cut through clouds of floating sediment. Slowly, Shapes appeared. Fish moving through the darkness, twisted metal buried in the silt, and then the unmistakable outline of the Fitzgerald's bow emerging from the void. The control room fell silent. After all these years, there she was, 729 feet of steel, resting in eerie stillness and partly buried in the lake bed. The drone's first assignment was to inspect the hatches. As it moved across the deck, the AI's object recognition system began identifying problem after problem, hundreds of them. The hatch clamps, one after another, the software-marked clamps that were bent, broken, or completely missing. This wasn't a small number of failures. It pointed to a widespread structural problem. At least part of the Coast Guard's theory suddenly seemed much more believable. And then there's the tape, the piece of evidence that could change everything. It's an audio tape recovered from the radio room. It isn't a data recorder, it's a voice recording. It might contain McSorley's actual final words. It might have captured the sounds of the ship striking the shoal. It might even contain the noise of the vessel breaking apart. For the first time, it could finally tell the families of those 29 men what happened during those final, terrible 10 minutes. Right now, experts are working to restore that tape. What if it contains a crew member shouting about UFOs? What do you think is on it? Let us know.